Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking a bit about how I practice for competitions that have every single event. Now, I compete in every single event, although I don't necessarily get all of them solved because I still have a hard time doing 4x4 and 5x5 blindfolded. But aside from that, I will let you know what I do for the rest of the events. First off, most competitions with all of the events are generally in the summer. This can be both a good and a bad thing, and I'll explain why. In the summer, it's warmer, which means you're not going to have cold fingers, and also you'll have more time to practice. But this is where it can also be kind of a bad thing. One thing I definitely don't like doing is practicing too much. I've practiced too much for competitions several times, especially competitions where I'm trying to practice a whole bunch of events, and it just gets kind of messy and I'm just scattered practicing little bits in a whole bunch of different places. So my first tip is that just don't practice too much. That's kind of a general tip for every competition. So competitions that have all of the events have feat solving. Now feat solving is one of my favorite events, so I'm going to practice this every time because when I don't practice feat, I generally get slower, and there's usually long periods of time in between feat competitions where there's no feat at competitions, so I get slower. Now for people that don't care at all about feat, this won't be a big deal, but for anyone that would just like to stay the same as they were at the last competition, I generally find that I have to practice feat to just maintain my time. This kind of goes with the last one, and it's that I practice events that I like, so feat, clock, big cubes, blindfolded. These are all at the top of my list, so I'm generally going to start off by solving them and making sure I'm still kind of around at the same time and trying to improve a little bit before the competition. That's another thing. These competitions are usually announced very far in advance, and this is an advantage to the competitors. Which is my next tip of things that I do for these competitions, is I look at the events that I can improve the easiest on, and I work on those. And then there's the opposite of that, which is events you cannot improve on easily. For me, this is stuff like Skewb and 2x2. Because these are events I've practiced in the past, I have some decent times officially that are faster than what I average now. So for me, it would take lots of practice and learning new algorithms to really improve on these events, and that's not something I'm really willing to do. So for that reason, I don't even solve a 2x2 or Skewb before the competition usually, because I don't think my turns per second is really going to improve if I practice at all on them, so I just think it's not even worth my time. So far this has all been stuff that happens very far in advance before the competition. So now I'll talk about, the first week or two before the competition. Now in this amount of time is when I almost stop practicing completely. I really only practice events that I still think I can improve on before the competition. Because the events that I really care about, like clock and feat, my times aren't really going to go down by practicing for a week. So all that can happen by me practicing is me getting nervous and me having higher expectations of what I'm going to get at that competition. Whereas if I don't solve a clock a week before the competition, I'm going into the competition pretty calm and not really worried about the times that I'm going to get because I was getting really fast or really slow times the week before. But then on the other hand, for some events that I like, such as blindfolded and multiple blindfolded, I practice those right up until like the day or a couple days before the competition, because those are sort of different events and they require my memory to be a little bit more on point. So for me, it's actually very helpful to not have practiced too much, but practice enough that I can still remember all of my letter pairs and rooms for those events. Another thing I like to do before the competition is look at the schedule and see what events are first. Generally these competitions are multiple days, so sometimes there are events really early in the morning. So if there's an event that I kind of like doing that's really early in the morning, I'll usually practice that right when I get up, just so I'm used to doing it in the morning. Also before the competition, I'll usually practice using a stack mat for some of the quicker events like clock, pyraminx, and 3x3, so that I can get the feeling for starting and picking up the puzzle quickly, because for those events, it can make a difference about your timer stops and starts. If you don't have a StackMat timer, there are plenty of other timers out there that have the option to hold the timer down for the same amount of time as a StackMat, like CS Timer, several of the phone timers, I think. But that is something I would at least look into practicing, because there has been a good number of times I've gotten a DNF, even recently, because I didn't hold my hands on the StackMat long enough. And then there is the day of the competition. To start off the day of the competition, I usually like to eat a light breakfast, but a healthy breakfast. Because if I eat something that's not really healthy, I've done this many times, I generally will feel sick throughout the day of the competition, and it's no fun competing while you feel sick. And then after I've eaten breakfast, I almost always pull out my 7x7 and do 5 or 6 solves on it. I do this even at competitions where there's not 7x7 as an event, and these aren't timed solves, and I'm not practicing for the event. I'm just warming up my fingers, and it works pretty quickly. This helps warm up your fingers pretty quickly because it's a larger cube, so that helps. And then I'm also solving for multiple minutes without taking a break, and that really gets your fingers warmed up fairly quickly. Some people might like doing it with larger cubes. I haven't found that I enjoy that. I generally like 7x7 because it's an event I practice, and those other cubes take much longer to solve. Another thing I've done to warm up my fingers quickly in the morning is one-handed, but switching off and doing one-handed in both hands. Because if you think about it, your hand gets tired much more quickly when you're doing one-handed, so that would kind of make me think that your fingers would warm up more quickly if you do one-handed than if you're just doing, quick little 3x3 solves. So all of this is usually before the competition, and then once I get to the competition, I usually don't practice at all. Now I staff every competition I go to, so this makes it pretty easy for me to stay busy throughout the entire day. For someone that doesn't quite know or feel comfortable staffing, I'd recommend hanging out with your friends, and if you don't have any friends, just sit down at a table and make a new friend. But for anyone that has a decent understanding of the regulations, staffing isn't just a way to keep busy, it's also a great way to help out at the competition. Whether it's judging, running, or scrambling, I'm always staying warmed up throughout the day, so I'm never really just sitting around getting cold fingers and bored. And then usually right before the specific event, I'll warm up for it a little bit, but this usually isn't anything more than just turning the puzzle right before I set it up on my scorecard. I never do timed solves the day of the competition, because that just gives me expectations of what to get, and I really don't want expectations going into an event. That's just my personal preference. It keeps me very calm as I'm solving. Again, this might not work for everyone, so you might like practicing a lot and having an expectation going into an event, but I think it's something at least worth trying for maybe an event you don't care about quite as much. Now, I always have my goals going into these competitions, but I try to not let those goals get to me until after the events are over. Because even during an event, you can ruin an entire average if you get a couple kind of bad or not so good solves to start off, and you just get stressed out because you're not going to meet your expectation for the average. This could ruin a great chance for you to get a good single in the same event. A good example of this for me was at a Michigan competition recently. In the final round of clock, I pretty much destroyed my average throughout the first 4 solves. But I didn't really let it get to me, and on the last solve I got a 5.80 second solve, which was a PB for me. Now admittedly it could have been faster, but it definitely could have been slower if I was stressed out and worried that I had just ruined my average. Another thing that's important to do during the day of the competition is stay hydrated. I have definitely gone through competitions where I did not drink enough good liquids, and again, it made me feel sick to my stomach. And it's not fun competing when you feel sick to your stomach. Also, it might be a good idea just to not eat too much. I've eaten more than an entire large pizza at lunch before, and again, sick to my stomach. That's about it for this video. If you have any questions about anything I talked about or anything I didn't talk about, feel free to leave it in a comment below or a message on any of my social medias, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I can. That is it for today. Thank you so very much for watching. Goodbye.